Hello, this is the lecture for European history on Tuesday, the 17th of November, 2020. My voice is shaky. Okay, actually, would you be kind enough, Jackson, to close the window? We can leave the fan on, but I don't think we need any more fresh air right now. Absolute monarchy in England and France is a change from medieval kingship, which was limited. It was limited by the communications technology of the times. It was limited by the limited education of people in the Middle Ages, and it was limited by the inefficiency of the structures of bureaucracy that were set up during the king's time and the emperor's times in the Middle Ages. Each city governed itself by a council of guildmasters who basically ran the city because they understood business in a way that the king and his court didn't. And the regions of the country were ruled indirectly through the feudal system of aristocracy. Everything was indirect through a system of loyalty. What this meant was that the king is not a grand decision maker for the entire country, no matter how much he might want to be. But when Europeans go out into the world, this begins to seem rather dowdy and old-fashioned because they see in the more advanced societies of East Asia something that they very much crave. In China and in Japan, you have an imperial system that, while very different from one another, seems to grant the ruler, the monarch, unfettered, unlimited power with no restrictions. No one has the ability to say no to the imperial government in either China or what Europeans see in Japan. And there are reasons for this. And there are ways in which this plays out. One of the things that happens in terms of the great exchange, the great cross-cultural exchange between the Europeans and the rest of the world in point of contact, that a lot of people don't know about, is the exchange that happens between Asia and Europe. Now remember, Asia is the source of the silks and spices. So Europeans already want some of the products that come from here. And the more they learn about silks and the works of art that are made with it, porcelain and the works of art that are made with it, and other really clever and inventive East Asian inventions, the more Europeans want to learn. They also see cities on a scale that don't exist in Europe or the Middle East. Huge, complex, relatively clean, relatively well run. And the European kings want this. They want this for themselves. They see Asia as an example for them. So the ultimate absolutist monarch, Louis XIV of France, is going to self-consciously ape what he has learned about the Chinese Empire. But it's a superficial understanding, which is no surprise because Europeans and East Asians have had so little contact over the years. There was some very halting occasional contact during the time of the Pax Romana, where the Chinese have representatives from a Western king called Antun, which was probably the Emperor Antoninus Pius of the Romans. There's the stories of the Polo brothers, told by Marco Polo in his story about his trip to Cathay and back during the time of the great Khan, Kublai. And there are the contacts that are made by the Portuguese and later others with China and with Japan. But the understanding that comes from really conversing with one another? That hasn't happened much yet, and it certainly hasn't percolated back. So what we're going to do now is look at a difference between the Orient and the Occident. The Orient comes from the French word for rise, having to do with sunrise. It refers to the east. Occident comes from the Latin word, or Occident comes from the Latin word Occident, which refers to sunset or the fall of the sun. It refers to the west. So Orient versus Occident, China versus the West. Now, as I've told you before, I think, there are two primary cultures in Eurasia, and there are two derivative cultures in Eurasia. The derivative cultures are middle children. They are India and the Middle East. They're derivative not because there's anything unoriginal about them, but because of their location, they draw in influence and ideas from the states around them. But China and the West, and by I refer to China, I'm also referring to the satellite nations of East Asia that surround it, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and so forth. China is its own beast, just as the West is its own beast. There are some limited influences from the outside world in pre-modern times, but those are very, very limited, and the same thing is true in China. Largely, China is self-invented, just as the West is largely self-invented. So you end up with a very different set of ideas. First off, the idea of God in China is so fundamentally different from the West. The West coheres around Christianity and develops with Judeo-Christian notions of ideal morality and so forth. It is a profoundly monotheistic society, a profoundly thoroughgoingly monotheistic culture. So, in the West, God is the Lord God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God is a being with a personality who has given us laws. So at the heart of society is this theocratic or theocentric notion of being in harmony with God's law. There is a church. There is a faith. And the church and faith are not under the control of the kings. The key individual in the history of the West is the West's understanding of Joshua Bar Joseph, Jesus Christ. So, how is this different in China? Well, in China, the central figure is Kung Fu Tzu, or Confucius. Master Kung is what Kung Fu Tzu means. Confucius is not a religious figure. He's neither a prophet nor a messiah. Confucius, C-O-N-F-U-C-I-U-S, Confucius, C-O-N-F-U-C-I-U-S, Confucius is a scholar advisor during the Warring States period of China, which is roughly contemporaneous with the period from Alexander the Great to the Punic Wars. Confucius is a philosopher, not a religious figure. And his ideas are not about any one God. They are not religiously oriented at all. Exactly. Confucianism is a philosophy of social harmony. That's what you should know. Confucianism is a philosophy of social harmony. Whereas Christianity is a religious faith of salvation. It's different. On a basic level, you're talking about the difference between oranges and bread pudding. They're both food, in that they're both ideas, Confucianism and Christianity, upon which their societies are built, but they are entirely different types of food. So, with Confucius and Confucianism, you signed in at the office? Yeah. Okay. You have a philosopher whose ideas, and you may want to shift yourself so that you can, be a little bit more this way so you can see me. His ideas at first are spread, by himself and by his disciple Mencius, which is obviously Latinized Chinese, just as Confucius is. And then China unifies around 200 BC under Qin Shi Huangdi. Qin Shi Huangdi, the first sovereign emperor of China, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, is not a Confucian. He's a legalist. Qin Shi Huangdi, being a legalist, believes that the best way you can run a society is to make laws about everything. The only comparison we have in our society, aside from totalitarian communism, is the Jewish Mishnah, the scribal law, which took the 10 Commandments, which were 10 commandments that could fit on 2 stone tablets, and turned them into a body of law that would fill a legal library. Don't work on the Sabbath, says the 10 Commandments, one of the 10 Commandments. Well, the Mishnah describes exactly how much weight a Jew can rightly lift during the Sabbath. So that's legalism. The belief that you can legislate your way towards utopia, or the belief that you can legislate your way towards a better human nature. The idea that government, through the coercive power of the state, has the capacity to enlighten us and to do so by forcing us to be good. It treats people like children or like slaves, and the government like Big Daddy with his whip. And if you break the laws, you get punished. Qin Shi Huangdi, in the first dynasty, the Qin dynasty of China, unifies China with blood and terror and force. Qin Shi Huangdi is not beloved. He is obeyed. To tell you what kind of guy he was, his funerary plans included building a man-made mountain at Xi'an and filling it with treasures that Egyptian pharaohs would be jealous of. Xi'an, the tomb of Qin Shi Huangdi, is the location of the famous terracotta warriors, an army of clay warriors, each of which is unique. These are not carbon copies cut and paste. Each of them is unique. He also was big in establishing the foundations of what will become the Great Canal and the Great Wall. Qin Shi Huangdi spent the lives of his people on his grand projects, and he turned China into a giant police state, but he unified it. After a few weak descendants, the Qin dynasty falls, and a new dynasty comes to power around 150 or so BC. They are the Han dynasties, and the Han dynasty embraced Confucianism instead of legalism. Confucianism, from Han Dynasty times, 100 or 200 years before Christ, until 1949 at least, is the dominant philosophy of China. It is a philosophy of social harmony. It is a philosophy of balance. It acknowledges divine and elemental powers, but it is not rooted in any one theology or any one belief system. It is about everyone having a place and there being a place for everyone. So the idea of God in the West is a person who judges you and loves you. In the East, what is elevated into the position of God in Confucianism is social harmony. Bending like a willow branch or like a weed to the various ebbs and flows around you. And this is going to come out. So social harmony, uber alles. Yes?
So would you compare that to more like Plato's Republic than a religion?
Yeah, that's a good comparison. But Plato's Republic is quintessentially Western. It relies on individuals. In China, as you will learn, and in East Asia in general, the individual is not in itself a discrete thing. It's part of something greater, the family. So, Confucianism is the dominant philosophy during the Han Dynasty and all subsequent dynasties up to the Chinese Republic, and it is ultimately attacked and destroyed by the new legalism of the Chinese Communist Party and their victory in 1949. Because of Confucianism, the notion of glory, which is something we understand very much in the West, is fundamentally different. In the West, glory is individual achievement. I stand out from the people around me. I am not like a willow branch. I'm like an oak tree. I stand against the storm. Give me your best shot, pal. I'm strong enough to take it. You all, hopefully, are being taught to be good people. Kind, generous, compassionate, well-mannered. But you are also implicitly being taught to compete. So that when the time comes, when all of you are applying for the same position in college or for the same job, each of you will have something that will stand out, that will make you stand apart from the people around you as somebody with a unique excellence. And that unique excellence will get you the job or will get you the place in the college that you want. In the West, glory is individual achievement, arrived at by being superior in some way to the people around you. It's not easy to be superior to the people around you. And it's certainly not an ubiquitous quality. No one is Superman, that I know. But most of us know what our talents and weaknesses are. And as you grow, you will become more able to bring out the good talents that you have to their best in their best light, and to mask or conceal or protect yourself against your own weaknesses. We all have them, strengths and weaknesses. But in the West, glory is individual achievement. You invent something, you stand up for something. If City Hall tells you to wear masks and you don't believe in wearing masks, you don't wear masks and you consequently pay fines or go to jail. That's an example. This is very different from Confucian China. In Confucian China, you are absolutely not supposed to stand out. Your glory is your family honor. Your glory is your family honor. In the West, we are taught to stand out. In the East, it is as if you have to carry with you a thin, giant fishbowl made of thin glass, filled almost to the brim with water, with some delicate goldfish inside. Whenever you go out into the world, out from your family home, you carry this with you. Now, if you've ever carried a heavy load that's also quite delicate, you know what I'm talking about. Just physically, the sensation of being stressed, but having to hold on. You are not going to move quickly. You are not going to jostle the people around you. You are going to be very careful about everything you do. Because in the West, if you bring shame by your actions, that shame is on you as an individual. You are a bad person. You are rude. You are naughty or nasty to old ladies. You are bad. Now, there's a little bit of, well, your parents must not have done a good job with you. There's a little bit of, if you're out at a school event and you act like a yutz, Coeur d'Alene Charter Academy is humiliated a little bit because you guys are, on a school event for us. But that's secondary. In East Asian society, in Confucian society, everything you do reflects upon your family, the living and the dead. That's the goldfish bowl. If you rock the boat, if you are discordant, if you stand against the wind rather than flowing with it, if you stand out, you slosh the water, maybe you stun or kill the fish, at worst you drop the bowl. In East Asia, a person's name is not primarily their individual. Your Christian name comes before your family name. That's not the way it is in China or Japan. In those Confucian-oriented societies, although Japan much less so, the family is the reality. The family is the life form. The family is the individual. You are a subset of your family. You are not an individual who comes from a family like in the West. You are a member of a shared life form, a communal life form. You are your family first, then your individual self second. And thus, the honor that you carry with you in your choices and your actions, in the way that you do things, in the way that you comport yourself, is very much in your hands. Your family honor is in your hands. To the point where if you behave shamefully or disgracefully in public, by cutting in front of somebody in line, by shoving somebody aside, by being a jerk, oh, every living member of your family will hear about it. Because even if you're in a big city, or you're in a village neighborhood, your mom will have to listen while the old ladies tell the story of your disgrace. And she'll have to agree that you're unworthy. But that's not all. Because in the afterlife, your dead grandmother, who loved you very much, will have to listen as the dead ghosts of the neighborhood ladies of her generation talk about your disgrace. In the afterlife, she will be shamed, as in this life, your mother will be shamed. Your entire family will lose face, will lose public honor. You carry this with you. So those tendencies that we have in the West towards individual distinction and individual achievement are absolutely handled in the opposite way in a Confucian society. You can achieve excellence by fitting in, by being completely willing to go with the flow, by subordinating yourself to the needs of your family and to the needs of every distinct and different situation. This isn't to say that everyone is a submissive slave. No, there's a hierarchy, and you have to respect and honor that hierarchy. In the West, it is expected that parents will sacrifice for their children. In the East, it is expected that children will sacrifice for their father. He is the head of the family. If something needs to happen, if the benefit needs to come to an individual, it will come to the father, because that will redound best to the family unit. If someone has to go on light rations, it won't be the parents, it'll be the kids. It won't be the boys, it'll be the girls. A philosophy of social harmony implies a social hierarchy, and Confucianism definitely has that sense of hierarchy in it. But in Confucianism, you are not supposed to rebel against it. That's the most disgraceful act of all. You're supposed to go along with it. You're supposed to willingly be a part of it, to fulfill the spirit of the law, the spirit of your place, not just the letter. It is a thoroughgoing and total philosophy of social harmony. Even the emperor has to do this. And we're going to talk about the way that the emperor acts like a willow branch in just a little bit. So, in Asia and China, you have a philosophy of social harmony rather than a religion of individual salvation. Glory is saving face for your family by making sure that your actions are within bounds. In the West, it is standing out from the people around you. Now, in the West, gold is a reward for all of that individual achievement. Gold is what you earn by your distinction. It is yours to do with as you like. Now, you may choose to give some in charity. You may choose to give some to needy people within your family. You may choose to buy something for others. But it's your choice. It's your choice. You get to decide. It is your individual reward for your glorious achievements, such as they are. Not so in the East. In the East, family decides. Your money is put into a family pot. Everyone who earns for the family is going to be cared for by the family. But it is the family, not the individual, who decides how the money is spent, who decides where to invest and what the priorities are. You might end up working really, really hard so that your older brother can get an education. because that education could raise up the entire family. Even though instead of getting an education, you've been working hard, and so you're going to keep working hard your entire life until your body runs out and you're dead. But your family will rise through the education of your elder brother. Gold is the family's resources, not your reward for individual achievement. So you can see some of the fundamental differences between China and the West. And these differences are not necessarily things that, for example, the King of France or his advisors are going to really understand. They're going to see things through their Western lens, and they're going to distort things out of proportion. So in China, you have the Son of Heaven. That is the emperor. That is his title, the Son of Heaven. And the emperor's job is unique in all the world, because the emperor lives a lifestyle like no other. The emperor wears colors of yellow that no one else can wear. The emperor uses vermilion ink, which is a bright, bright red ink that no one else can use. The emperor wears styles of clothing that no one else can wear, eats foods that no one else eats, has a daily routine like no other, because the emperor's job is to cohabitate with the elemental powers and deities, the gods, to keep his head among the gods and the ever-changing balance of elemental forces in the universe. So that like a surfer, he can orient Zhongguo, the Middle Kingdom, the Chinese Empire, and thus the world, to match whatever the surf is telling him. His head is among the gods, his feet are on the ground, and the emperor, if he is doing his job, will balance moment by moment the empire of China with the ever-changing balance of primal forces in the universe. And if he succeeds, he has the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven is proof that the emperor has and is harmonizing the empire to the ever-changing balance of primal forces. That the emperor is harmonizing the empire according to the ever-changing balance of elemental forces. That is the mandate of heaven. How can you know that an emperor has the mandate of heaven? Well, you know by peacetime, not war. You know by health, not plague. You know by calm, not natural disasters. How can you tell the emperor has lost the mandate of heaven? Earthquakes, tidal waves, fires, floods, tornadoes, cyclones, invasions, rebellions, the breakdown of good relations between family members. Everyone loses face. Suffering. Right now, the Communist Party in China is in serious trouble because despite 65 or 70 years, actually over 70 years, of programming, this notion of the mandate of heaven runs deep. And what has China faced in the last year? It has faced the rise of COVID, which the Communist Party did nothing to control in its first months, giving the world a pandemic. That's a fact. That's not a political opinion. They suppressed the information, and they treated COVID-19 like it was a political dissension, not like it was a disease, because they didn't want to be seen to have plague. Well, now they've got plague. China has had worse flooding in the last year than they've had in the last 30 or 40. The Chinese are gripping hard and making enemies of all their neighbors at the same time, simultaneously, in attempts to grab land from their neighbors. And they are in the process of being caught, harvesting the organs of their political dissidents, while the people are still alive. If you need a heart transplant, you have the money, you can go to the People's Republic of China and schedule the heart transplant. That means that the Chinese who you're working with, the Communist Party who runs all of this, knows when somebody's no longer going to need their heart. How can they do this on a scale where thousands and thousands of people every year get heart transplants in China? By scheduling them. Well, the person who used to be using the heart won't need it anymore. So you pluck it from their still breathing corpse, they die, and now you've got a fresh new heart. And the government, because you've spent the money, has fattened that person up so the heart's going to be nice and healthy when you get it. They're running concentration camps with over 1 million people being brainwashed and used as organ banks or slave labor in Xinjiang, in Tibet, and elsewhere. This is not peaceful times. This is indication of a government that is desperate because by the old Confucian standards, they have lost the mandate of heaven. The world itself is crying out with disasters, with problems, with floods, with disease. Well, Communist China is not the old Chinese empire. Whether it will stand or fall is an open question. But this idea that you tell that the emperor has the mandate of heaven by how peaceful and prosperous and calm everything is, that is deeply Confucian. In the West, people have tried this. You are too young to remember it, but probably actually around the time you were born, 2006 or so? When were you guys born?
2005, 2004.
Okay, so just after you were born. There was a big big hurricane called Katrina that swept up through the Gulf of Mexico and smacked into New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, New Orleans, like Holland, is basically below sea level. It is a city that was built by colonial Frenchmen hundreds of years ago, and the land has sunk since then. So they've had to build dikes and dams around the entire place. Well, from the 1980s, people have been trying to get the dikes modernized. But both city officials who wanted the money for graft and environmentalists who didn't want to disturb the wildlife said, no, we can't modernize the dike system. So when a hurricane had a direct hit on New Orleans in 2006-7, somewhere around then, the city flooded massively. Law and order broke down for weeks. People went to the emergency shelters, like their Superdome, where the city and state officials were supposed to have toilet paper, emergency food, water, blankets, beds. There was none of that there because New Orleans is famous for its political corruption, and the money had been spent on kickbacks and payoffs, not on the emergency gear. So people, thousands of them, were in the Superdome without the right medical supplies, without the right survival supplies. It was bad. I mean, really bad. An American city went back almost to the Stone Age for a little while. People blamed President Bush, George Walker Bush, the second President Bush. They blamed him, even though the President of the United States is not responsible for emergency preparation. That's the mayor of Louisiana and the governor of Louisiana, both of whom were Democrats. But somehow the press, impartial as ever, blamed President Bush. And one of the reasons why Republicans did so badly in 2006 elections and 2008 elections is because the press had actually made it stick that somehow the President of the United States, George W. Bush, was responsible for the poor reaction and the poor survival of the city of Louisiana against a hurricane. They had successfully applied a Confucian standard of the mandate of heaven to an American politician, blaming the politician for a natural disaster. I can tell you, you do not have politicians in control of weather machines going, yeah, I'm going to target that storm and ride it into a Democrat city. No, that's not. Weather happens. Weather happens. Just like disease happens sometimes. Blaming political officials for natural disasters is kind of in Western tradition, but it is very much a part of the Confucian tradition in China. It is an indication of the loss of the mandate of heaven. Now, let me see if I have. should have it. Huh. But I don't. Let me check here. See if I can pick it up. No what? I'll bring it in tomorrow. What we'll see tomorrow is a clip from the movie The Last Emperor, which shows you the life of the young emperor who was the last emperor of China, Puyi, and the lifestyle that he led inside the Forbidden City. But I'll wait until tomorrow to show that because I want to show it in DVD form, and I'll also try for you at home to get you links to the sections I want to see. If not, maybe I can find a free version of the movie online for you to see. Instead, what I'm going to do is compare this to what happens in the West. In the West, the kings Louis, 14th, 15th, 16th, under the influence of Catholic clergy like Cardinal Richelieu and Cardinal Mazarin, are all trying to centralize and increase the power of the French monarch. They want to do this because they have an alliance with the French monarchy, and they consider France to be part of the property of the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, the Roman Catholic clergy make up a third of the French legislature, the l'État général, the Estates General. So these officials and their Bourbon monarch allies are trying to centralize power in France. And one of the things that happens under the most archetypical absolute monarch in all of Western history, King Louis XIV, Louis XIV of the House of Bourbon of France, Louis XIV calls himself Le Roi Soleil. Le Roi Soleil. Le Roi Soleil, in my lousy French accent, means the Sun King. I am all that is France. I am the Sun King. As the sun, everything revolves around me. The planets, the comets, all of it. I am the Sun King, the bright shining center of the French universe. He calls himself this. Do you see a slight difference between the Sun King and the Son of Heaven? Do you see a slight difference in emphasis? Louis also famously says, I don't remember where I have this in the notes, but I'll write it down here, just in case. He says, L'État, c'est moi. And what L'État, c'est moi means is, does any French student wish to translate L'État, c'est moi? L apostrophe E-T-A-T, C apostrophe E-S-T, M-O-I.
It looks okay, so L'État looks a lot like, say, the United States.
The state.
The state.
Yeah, the state is me. Or the more common English translation, Dr. LeBlanc will be proud. The more typical English translation, I am the state. L'État, c'est moi. I am the state. I am all that is France. L'État, c'est moi. The state is me. I am the state. So Louis personally identifies all government power with himself personally. And people say, oh yes, Your Majesty, of course you're the state. Absolutely you're the state. Ça c'est tout, or whatever you would have. Usted, or whatever usted is in French. I don't know, the formal you.
That's Spanish.
What?
That's Spanish.
I know! Because I don't really speak other languages. I speak English and bad English. And a few other words, most of them naughty from other languages. So, the Sun King, L'État c'est moi, Le Roi Soleil, all of these things. This is no accident. Louis knows because his advisors have told him what the Son of Heaven is. But instead of it being an emperor whose job it is to understand the ever-changing balances of the universe so that he can orient China like a surfboard to ride the wave, he then makes a statement of absolute royal vanity that I am the center of the universe, that I am the state, I, me, myself. It's not about the empire. It's not about fitting in. It's not about the emperor's duty to live in social harmony with the universe and to make mankind live in social harmony with the universe. No, no, no. It's about Louis the XIV as a person. He is the state. He is the dominant one. Instead of legitimacy, in the West, we have what you've already heard, the divine right of kings, which is the justification for monarchical absolutism, which is this. If God didn't want Louis to be the boss of you in everything, God would not have made Louis XIV your king. But, self-evidently, since God made Louis XIV your king, he is the boss of you, and you'd better do what he says. You'd better do the corvée and to pay the taxes and do all the other things the French government wants you to do. Because he is the king. God put him there. Legitimacy comes from God through the king down to you. It is a top-down legitimacy. And it's a Western version of the mandate of heaven. But it doesn't rest on natural disasters. It rests on political power. The church agrees. The king has divinely ordained powers. The government serves the king, giving him divinely, in effect, ordained powers. But that's not all. In order for the Emperor of China to have his head in the clouds, the day-to-day operations of the government are going to be fulfilled by other people. Now, the first sovereign emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, in the Qin dynasty, their legalists, they didn't do it this way. Like the communists today, they had the government run everything, make all the laws, punish people for not obeying them, yada yada. Qin Shi Huangdi ran the government. He was not a part of this. But the Han emperors of China, following Confucianism, set up a system that is so ahead of its time, it's breathtaking. It's the system of examinations, government examinations. Any boy from any family, highborn or lowborn, can submit themselves and take a government exam. That means they've got to walk in there literate and numerate and also aware of and familiar with the philosopher Confucius's works and the works of Mencius and the other great Confucian classics. Anyone, though, can learn these things if they find a way to give that boy that knowledge. Now, whoever scores highest gets hired by the government at their lowest level of bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is the closest thing to a pure meritocracy that the world knows at that point in time. The Confucian bureaucracy of China are run by what in the West are called mandarins. That's where the name the orange comes from, mandarins. But in the East they're called shi. And these shi are literati, they are scholars of Confucian philosophy. The shi, the mandarin, are scholars of Confucian philosophy. Whenever they want to get promoted, they take the next higher level of exam. And each level of exams goes deeper and deeper into the understanding of Confucian philosophy. And these are the people who are put in charge of running the administration of China's government, central and regional. Everything is run by the mandarins. Oh, there are still noblemen in China, but they are displaced as the actual rulers of their regions. Instead, the central imperial government from Han Dynasty times is going to operate the government mechanisms through these through these literati, these scholars of Confucian philosophy. And you might ask, well, that means that the son of the lowest peasant can be the chief advisor to the emperor. Yeah, it happened on many occasions. You have very low-born bureaucrats who just happen to be brilliant people, really hardworking, really smart, who rise up through the system like cream to the top, and they run the government. So from Han Dynasty times down to the end of the Chinese Empire, and really to the fall of the Chinese Republic in 49, you have a system where the smartest people rise up through government authority in an absolute pure meritocracy. That's Unheard of. And it's thousands of years ahead of the time. And what it does is it grants the Chinese government the best and the brightest for their leaders. It's a really good system. It's a system we ape. Yeah.
Intelligence doesn't necessarily equivalent sanity.
It doesn't equate to wisdom either. That's why in Dungeons and Dragons there are two separate stats, which is, of course, my touchstone. Here's the difference, though. It's not mere intelligence. This is where our system breaks down. If you want to get a job with the U.S. State Department, you got to do really well in college. But then you got to take government exams. Just like the Chinese, our government uses exams because we imitate them. But our exams are about things like international relations or international trade and economics or things like that. If you want to go into the Department of Agriculture, you've got to get an agronomy degree and take examinations on the technical details of industrial agriculture. Oh, that makes so much sense to us. We're so logical in America. We're stupid! The Chinese were much smarter about this because they didn't test technical knowledge. They assumed that somebody smart enough to understand Confucian philosophy would be able to figure out the technical details of governance. And they were right. Confucian philosophy teaches wisdom. It teaches social harmony, which involves wisdom. And because of that, they're not just testing IQ, they're testing the application of intelligence, and that application is often called wisdom.
But the reason why America isn't burnt down in flames is because different opinions do exist.
No. You're okay. You're confusing communist China with Confucian China. They're very different. Communists have tried their best to murder Confucian China in the minds and hearts and memories of their own people in the world. Their system worked. They had, for thousands of years, the most advanced society on Earth, in part because of this system. What happened was, and we're going to talk about this, the Chinese turned their backs on the world in the 1600s, so did the Japanese, and they are still paying the price for that. That refusal to modernize, that refusal to recognize a reality outside of their own that's unpleasant. But their system functioned very, very well. What's happening now is a result, first of all, of natural disasters. Second of all, of the fact that China is not Confucianist anymore. It is communist. It is legalist. It's run by power-hungry people who are desperate to control every narrative, every story, every situation, because they know they're not in control of nature, so the least they want to be is in control of other people. If you can't control the world, control people. Our system makes sense, too, if you believe that the most important thing in a government bureaucrat is technical knowledge. I personally don't believe that. I believe the most important thing is what you would call wisdom or sanity. And a system of Confucian philosophy examinations, oddly enough, tests exactly for that. Because it's not merely the recitation of facts that the examiner is reading for. They're also reading for the application of that knowledge in practical situations, and that is wisdom. Go ahead.
But because of the social hierarchy and the enforcement of that, and the tests on top of that, it would be filtering a specific person with a specific point of view, therefore there would be no conflict.
If what you mean by a specific point of view is Confucian, you're right. But Confucianism is like Christianity or Judaism. It's a broad set of ideas that there are different subgroups of, there are different interpretations of. I think that any Chinese bureaucrat worth his salt would understand you're talking about groupthink. You're talking about everyone thinking the same way, therefore nobody is thinking. Sort of like PC culture wants us to be. No, they don't want a monoculture in the sense of everyone thinking in exactly the same way. Confucian philosophy, like any good philosophy, has depth enough to encourage people to have ideas that are within a broad spectrum, but that are still well thought out, functional. I'm not saying it's a perfect system. I am saying that it's not the sort of system that will provide everyone thinking in lockstep. That isn't what they actually had. Chinese bureaucrats, the mandarins, were actually very effective. And it wasn't because they were blind. Today, under the communists, everyone thinks in lockstep. You have to. Otherwise, you get punished. But not under the Confucian system, at least not when it was healthy. Were there times when the Confucian system became corrupt? Yeah. And that was the time when the dynasty lost the mandate of heaven, the government became rigid, and a new dynasty took over and loosened things up again. Believe it or not, history does answer your point. Look into it. Chinese history is a labyrinth of mystery and wonder. It's fascinating. And I've got some good books in here on it. Thank you for your questions. They're good, and I appreciate them. Do you have anything else to add?
Not that I can think of at the moment.
Okay, good. In the West, what we set up are bureaucracies. In fact, the term bureaucrat comes from the French for desk man. Desk man. I'm a desk man. I ride a desk. I do paperwork. I have an inbox and I have an outbox. And I process paperwork all day. I'm a desk man. But the idea of being a desk man, as unappealing as it is to most Americans, does make royal government in France and throughout Europe much more efficient. So what begins to happen as the bureaucracy in France is built in a French version of the Confucian system. And the French also, they don't do philosophy. The French do some philosophy, they do some Christian theology, but they also do the technical stuff that we're so concerned about. What they do is they establish a bureaucracy that is going to start taking over from the nobles in terms of the running of the day-to-day governance of all of France, including the cities, including the country regions, including everything. The French bureaucracy that the Louis get from China, the idea from China, is going to make it possible for the kings to actually reach in to everyone's lives and begin to try to control them. But the French kings are going to use that bureaucracy in a legalistic fashion for their own aggrandizement of power. In China, the idea is the government is supposed to function like a well-oiled machine in the background. Nobody has to think about it. The emperor focuses on the heavens. The government handles everything from a position of stability, social harmony, and things work. And I guess that's where we will leave things for today. If you have no questions, you can talk quietly amongst yourselves until dismissal. Thank you very much at home.